Hi, I'm Lance Cottrell, Chief Scientist at Ntrepid, and today I want to talk about non-technical misattribution. All of the things other than the technical information your computer and your network gives away about you that make up your online identity and can be used to identify you as yourself or show that you're not who you say you are. Now this is part 3 of a 4-part series on misattribution. So if you haven't watched the earlier parts, you might want to go back and at least watch the introduction to get an overview and definition of misattribution. Non-technical misattribution is shaping all of the soft identifiers that are used to recognize you online. These are things like your name, your account name, your avatar. All the different identifiers that you're putting out there can be used to recognize who you are or recognize that you're not who you're pretending to be. Although technical misattribution often gets the lion's share of the attention, in my experience, it's the non-technical misattribution mistakes that often blow the most operations. So the first thing to look at with your non-technical misattribution is misattributing your online presence. So that's your accounts and their history of your accounts and their activity. So if you need to be engaging on social media, you need to create those social media accounts and they need to be actively used. They need to have a history and making sure that that behavior looks right. I've often been friended by fake accounts and you can tell they're fake because they were created last week, there's no other activity on them, and they just shout, this was made up really quickly to try to set up new friendships with people to surveil them. People are very sensitive to that kind of thing. So making sure that your account exists and is aged and has normal kinds of activity, right? You don't always post about the same thing. So there should be a range of topics about which you've talked within these accounts. And all of that needs to make sense given who you're supposed to be and where you're supposed to be. One thing a lot of people don't think about is social misattribution, the social network that's exposed through your accounts and the social media that you're using. Anyone looking at you can see who do you follow, who do you like, who follows you, who do you engage with, who are your friends on that platform. And all of that says a lot about who you are. And normal friend networks have very characteristic patterns. So I have a number of friends, most of those friends have friends in common. So if I have a star-shaped social network where I'm friends with a whole lot of people but none of them know each other, that's highly unusual, right? We usually move in social circles and there'll be a number of different social circles. I might have a group of high school friends. I might have a group of current friends through a hobby. I would certainly have friends from work. Each one of these you would expect to have high degrees of redundancy and overlap and interconnection within those social circles. And so when you look at someone's social profile and you don't see that, that immediately suggests that there's something strange going on. But of course, this means there's a lot of work for you if you want to set up an identity and misattribute it effectively if your opponent is smart enough and has the resources to be looking at your social networks. So you need to be building up the connections. You need to go out and make real friends, because if all of your friends are just other fake accounts, again, that's going to look real strange. So you need to find real people who are willing to friend you and then work your way into their social networks. Because if you have integration into real existing social networks, they will have the appropriate kinds of patterns of connection to make your persona look plausible. Financial misattribution also falls under the non-technical side of misattribution, because the reality is a lot of the financial transactions you're doing online may be visible to your opponents depending on how well resourced they are. So how did you pay for that internet connection? How did you buy that VPN service? How did you rent that server that you're using? All of that can be visible. And we see a lot of people trying to hide their tracks by using Bitcoin. And the thing they forget is in many ways it's actually less anonymous than conventional payment systems. Whereas your credit card is in a real name, and so the bank and the merchant has that information. With Bitcoin, your name isn't there, but every single transaction that has ever taken place through Bitcoin is visible on the chain and will be forever. And so anyone can go in there and see, the same person who paid for A also paid for B. And it can cause a number of your identities to then get tied together, because someone can say, John, Fred, Sally, Susie, all got their coins from the same source and then all did different things online. They're probably all connected to each other, if not in fact just the same person operating under different names. So it takes a lot of work to hide those financial tracks that you may be leaving behind. Now, if your opponent's not all that interested or not all that sophisticated, maybe this isn't a problem. But if you're going up against high-value targets, nation-state actors, counterintelligence kind of situations, you really need to make sure that the financial aspects of your activities don't undermine everything else you're doing. Writing style may be one of the hardest things to hide when it comes to the non-technical side of misattribution, because it's so unconscious. Most of us are unaware of the patterns that we leave in our writing on a normal basis. Which words do we use? What kind of phrases? How do we use punctuation? Do we like the Oxford comma or not? All of that kind of thing creates a unique fingerprint. That's why journalists are able to go and find anonymously published books and then discover who actually wrote them, because there's writing samples out there and they can do this automated analysis and discover who actually was behind this. So as an operator trying to create misattribution, you need to worry not only that your writing style will connect your real identity to your online personas or identities, but also that it will tie them to each other. So even if there aren't many writing samples of you personally on the internet, if you're running many different identities and they're all writing things on the internet, they may be tied to each other based on this writing style. So it's important to be extremely conscious about how you write, using different patterns, different structures, different sentence lengths, different favorite words, different sign-ons and sign-offs for each one of these identities, and ideally running some author identification software against your own writing to make sure that you're doing it right, because it's really, really easy to do it wrong. In fact, I had personal experience with this. We developed some of our own tools for doing author identification, and so the first test I gave our researchers was to go look at an old mailing list that I was on in the early 90s, which I had joined both in true name and an alias just as an experiment. And I said, there's a bunch of writing samples of me at that time, find who my alias was. They went off, ran the data set, and immediately came back, and with very high confidence were able to identify the alias that I'd been using. And even back then, I had been making real effort to try to separate the way I wrote, but obviously I didn't do it well enough. Now, keeping track of all these soft misattribution identifiers can get really complicated really quickly, especially if you've got multiple identities that you're trying to juggle. The amount of information that you're keeping track of, and who knows who, and who has which social networks and which accounts, and making sure that you never give the same phone number or address or photo used between different accounts can quickly get overwhelming. And most of the tools that exist out there right now for helping with misattribution only focus on the technical misattribution. But creating a system to manage the non-technical misattribution is critical to being successful, because that's where the mistakes are most often made. In the next and final episode of this series on misattribution, I'll be talking about the challenges of misattribution. Why is it so hard, and how does it typically go wrong? What are the mistakes people really make in trying to hide their identities when they're engaging on the internet? I hope you've enjoyed this episode on non-technical misattribution. In the next installment, the final episode of this series, we'll be talking about misattribution challenges. Why is it so hard to maintain an alias online against an active opponent? And how do these things actually fail in practice? If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to the channel so you get automatic updates when the final episode is released and when any of our other videos get uploaded on misattribution and online operations. Till next time, ciao.